Yeah, I think so. Right?
You can start. You got this good. We had a good talk about it. I'll get in. We can go over our data.
All right, so I've got some of our 3A data that I want to present to you. And then also some Regents data and then just an update on civic readiness and mechanisms. Yeah, so that's kind of our agenda. First item I have for you, just State Ed put out this document. Greg, I'm sure you've probably seen it, read it already, but I'm not sure that everybody else has. Sort of outlining the differences between the 2021 3A test and previous tests they've given. Main difference is that the kids sat for part one, the multiple choice of both the math and ELA, as opposed to the constructive response. And the other thing that they did is they used previous test questions that they've used in the past, so that they could scale that a little easier than using brand new questions on the test. They did not publish the results for the state to compare to, so we can't compare it to the state. I went back on data.nice.org this morning just to kind of take a look at that. Can't do that. The other thing that they did not allow us to do is also compare it to our BOCES region or the RIT, which we're usually able to do when you take a look at the skill and you take a look at the questions in the past on the results to other schools within the region. So this document basically outlines some of that information. Those are the highlights of the document. Have a chance. There's also some other things in here outlining a little bit about how we can still utilize this test to drive some of your instruction for the school year district. Questions on that?
Do you have an extra copy of that?
Oh yeah,
I don't
sure. Sorry about that.
Chris, is this? Okay. So one of the things I was interested in is the standards, and do they have it broken up by like I have the special ed in?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, they have the skills. Yeah, they have it.
Okay. All right. So what I was interested in, and I think I'm going to ask Chris in if this can be shared with the teachers.
Oh yeah.
Because I was thinking, I'm just going to throw this out there. If you look at the grade 3 LA, and so we can kind of see where the kids were strong, where they were weak. If that would be helpful to not only the current 3rd grade teachers, but also to the 4th grade teachers. So they can kind of see where the kids from the previous year, where they kind of had weaknesses. I was just kind of thinking about that as a consideration. And I thought this was really good information to see where the kids are strong and weak. And then I just went through, I just thought about this afternoon. I was just wondering, and because of my background in special ed, if there's any skill areas where the special ed kids did like as good or a little bit better than the regular kids. And there were some categories. And I said, wow, but I think that's a kudos to what the support group special education teachers are doing. So, but I said, I just wanted to know if this, I just thought this would be good information to share with the teachers in their, their team meetings or something. I didn't know if it was in the works or what.
It is in the works. I did send out each building has also a breakdown for each grade level for ELA and that. So that's and that'll be some further conversation as we talked about instruction this year with ELA. Also the SAVIS and Amplify.
To see how many of those skills that they're teaching are they can align and sell that in here.
Yep. And we'll go through that. What I've given you, just so you're aware, you have district information. So we're looking right now today strictly just at how did we do as a district as a whole, not individual schools. So when you look at that data, just understand that it's district wide. Next page I have for you, for those of us who don't know about the levels in the 3A testing. Many of us do. We have some work that we've done with that. Just wanted to point these out to you. When we looked at the data in a few minutes, level 3 and level 4 is what the state considers proficient on meeting the state exams. Another area that we really take a look at, especially when we talk about our schools is we also take a look at the number of twos that we have, because those students are partially meeting the state standards at that grade level also. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into the data.
But
So
they
we,
don't really give you credit for how many kids score at each level. What they're really looking at is how many kids progress from
we're
one to
looking
the
at
other.
progression.
So it's not like, yay, you, 80% of your kids scored a 3. It's like, okay, 80% scored a 3. Now we want 50% of them to score a 4. Right? They're trying to,
What we try to move, and what you're trying to do is move the kids up at least to one level. So when we go from 1s to 2s, that's actually where we end up getting on a plan for the state. Because we at one time had more 1s than we had 2s. So we had to move those 1s up to 2s. And that's really where you make your biggest gain. If you're looking at the state test, looking at coming off the list, the advice they give you is to take a look at your high 1s and move those over to 2s, take a look at your high 2s, try to move those up to 3s for the following year.
I guess it takes me to the next piece of this, because we obviously know over the last several years, pretty much since APPR changed, that there's been a higher degree of opt-out. And I'm particularly looking at the next document, which shows the numbers are startlingly low in 7th and 8th grade for the number of kids that take the test. But I guess what the challenging piece of that is if a kid is consistently a 3 student and will always be a 3 student and is okay at being a 3 student proficient, that's not having as big an impact as the kid that needs to go from the 1 to the 2 or the 2 to the 3. Okay. But it's hard to know that because we don't know which segment are getting opted out, right? Are they kids who needed to see if they were struggling or not, or are they?
There's other ways that you're looking at that too.
Right.
I mean, state data is not necessarily teaching you or elementary.
Okay.
We're looking more at other sources of data that can do that. Specific, I mean, the first we started with this historic.
Okay.
Yep.
And then I think the other piece that we're looking at that I'm going to share with the PTs tomorrow is prioritizing the standards. So which ones are the real focus standards we need to put all of our energy into, which is going to make the greatest gains, because we have a huge amount in the elementary to cover, and not all of them are taught to the maximum for that. So making sure that we're really focusing on those priority standards first, and then addressing the other pieces as well into where the growth.
Which we need is the basis for the priority standards.
So when we were in Nashville, Renaissance breaks them down. There's priority standards already within the state. They're the ones that you have to get during that grade level. That's when it's that mastery has to happen. So it's already outlined. We'll share that with the PTs tomorrow so that they can start to pace out their curriculum that will focus on those standards.
Is that in this data?
That's not.
What percentage of our kids took it overall? Graduate?
Percent, I get the, you mean during COVID?
Yeah, that's what we're looking
Yeah,
at. Results.
their numbers from the 18-19 did not go down that much. I don't think we've got quite 50%. I'd say we probably were around the 40%.
That was the state there.
That was the state
Yeah.
average, 40%.
Well,
Yeah.
if you go through, Craig, just a ballpark figure for the class size was 400.
Yeah.
So if you look through grades 3
Yeah.
and 4, it's about 75%. And it drops down from there.
That's a good one.
Yeah, that's super
Overall,
interesting to look at that.
This is the rough number, 400 is close to that on our 2 levels. Grade 4 and 5 at one point had closer to 500. So those are, skewed, but I would say ballpark is overall. But 7, 8 numbers drastically reduced from 3. Yeah.
It's crazy. I've never seen the straw is where it just falls right off.
For some reason?
Look, that's kind of those families where it's beginning of the opt-out movement. So I think across the board, you see the same trend across the board. You'll see more 3rd graders this coming year participate than were in 3rd grade participating last year. So the numbers steadily seem to climb and increase with every passing year. But that middle school group 7, 8, that's really the kind of the start of the opt-out movement. They're in grade 4 back at the, or 3 time of just kindergarten, one, so they're all wrapped up in that.
I would venture to
So
say
they're
even in
opting
your
out.
high school, because I was that parent.
Yeah. That's the other thing that COVID changed, is COVID remember for these assessments that in years past, if you didn't come to school, we were required to try and have you do makeup. And this, the past year, if you didn't come, we just counted it as an opt-out.
So they didn't have to write a letter.
Right.
So then how do we change it and want them, how do we get the parents to tell their children to do this and the teachers to do this? Because my son took them because I doubt him all the time because he never, does his homework and stuff like that. He excelled, he did amazing. So I think it's real eye-opener when parents get this stuff and it's either really good or really bad. So if we can just get them to do it once, and if it's bad, they can see how much help their kids need to help them. So how do we?
I think it's such a tough nut to crack though, because
Yeah.
for me, I had one student who he's up there graduating this year, but I opted him out because he was that kid who was never gonna, he gets really bad test anxiety, but he was also never really gonna show progression. Like he just was where he was and it was unnecessary stress for him. And my younger one, like undiagnosed auditory processing with no, like I couldn't put him through that. It was too, to me, this timing isn't relevant, right? Like it's November, we're getting this right now on kids who took this last spring. Like,
Oh, I know, but we're
So-
all year now.
so why we all opt out is different. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I kind of agree with Chris. I think we'd have to get to the core of why people are still not encouraging their kids to take these before we could tackle how to move the needle on.
We're not sure if that opt-out movement still, I mean, it was really it was like a big thing,
It's
like
not
the Fed.
It's not as strong as it once was,
Yeah.
but they'll still have a faction of
Yeah.
people that continue to opt out forever, just
Oh,
because
yeah.
it's so.
But to
So
Anna's
controversial.
point, what can we do? Like,
Yeah,
what
because
can we do to kind of
eventually if
encourage it?
these scores just are low and low and low, doesn't that help us getting some assistance from the state and things like that is to have, more
No.
programs or things like that?
Not really,
No?
no, I mean, at some point it comes down to kind of personal preference, and there's so little, really the thing that's associated with these assessments that's important is state accountability. I mean, as far as instruction goes, we have so many other metrics and means that teachers can assess kids on and use for individual games in the classroom, but that's really where I think for a buck is for that piece of it. But the problem is, I would argue that if the state was going to use these numbers for accountability, it might get us off the list because we had such significant gains from 1819 to 2021. I mean, our numbers are off the chart comparatively speaking. There's a lot of reasons for that. Some could be good, some could be not good, but they're not using these numbers for any, it's just blowing it over and saying whatever you were doing 3 years ago, you must still be in that same boat performance-wise. So
Right, and so I think it would be a better, to me, it would be a better argument if they're seeing continued high opt-out numbers, that it's got to be on the state's end at some point that they look at this and say, are we testing in an appropriate time frame and are we actually utilizing this data in a productive way? Right, that's the challenge, that therein lies the challenge. To Karen's first point, if we're going to take this data for the third graders and share it with the fourth grade teachers, well, then that makes sense. But if a teacher assessed this child and then lost that, doesn't have that child anymore, how do they then?
Or they don't have that class.
Right, that child is gone, they've moved on. And in the instance, like a sixth grader moved to seventh grade or an eighth grader moved to ninth grade, like you've lost your opportunity to.
It's hard for me to believe that a child that's opting out or a child's family that's opting out is because they think they will excel. It's extremely hard for me to believe that. If we have a breakdown from school to school, how they opt out, I'd like to see Ridge compared to Bellamy, or I'd like to see Stokes, obviously compared to Gans. I feel that the opt out would be because the kids just don't want to take it. And I don't feel like the parents would back them up because the parents are like, whatever, I can opt out. I can't believe that is the correct.
Middle school kids call the shots in a lot of our homes. And
Exactly.
I'm sure it's the same here.
Exactly.
They tell their parents, I don't want to take it. It makes no sense. I don't need to do it. You write me.
They said I don't have to. I can't take this like laying down like as if we would be, they're not taking it because they're so amazing. Like,
I don't think that's it though. I don't think that's why. I think it's
We had some concerns this year where they were voiced from elementary up through the high school level. The parents actually felt a lot like they really didn't want their kids to take it because they didn't want this test to be on their school record because of the year that we had. So I had a lot of feeling questions for Regencies and do I take, I think the exemption, do I not take? I don't want it on their record because they just felt that they really didn't get, you know, a lot of what they needed to have with the modality that we were in. We were out, we were remote, some kids were hybrid, some kids stayed home. So we did have concerns on the other end that parents just didn't want this to be a part of their school record because they didn't feel it would be a fair assessment for their child. Now, on the flip side of that, maybe we might find that the parents might actually say this year, I want to really see where you're at right now after 2 years of school. So maybe they might actually say so, but Craig's point, I don't think we're gonna get that in the middle school.
I think the challenge in the middle school though is now you're asking these kids to take a state test in April and then a final exam in June. And I think it's really hard to resolve that in your head, you know, or for the kids to resolve that, and it's a lot of pressure. You know, I don't know, in my experience, now that my kids are older, I don't think anybody who opted out because they thought their kid was so great they didn't need to take the test. I think it's when APPR happened and they were tying teacher outcomes to test scores. A lot of people wanted to support teachers and felt that was not, you know, there was a lot of teachers behind that movement. You would have to agree. Because this one test, as Peter just said, this is not the only way that we're looking at kids, and it's not the most relevant way. But a lot of people were as well, someone in my boat, I thought it was a lot of unnecessary pressure for something that didn't bear a lot of relevance. I feel like I've always said, just personally, give this test in October, get us some results in January, and let these educators work from January to June to move that needle and see where they are again next fall. Versus we're going to do it in the spring and now the kid is gone on to another class, on to another grade. It's just not executed as well as it could be. And then there's another contingent that feels that the test makers drive how we teach kids to make a profit. I feel there's still definitely a segment of our opt-outers that don't like that piece of it.
Yeah, but wasn't the original motivation, I don't know how many years ago, but when the standards came in and the idea of comparing performance between states or across the state, that, you know, there was a lot of motivations for that, and that wasn't directly aimed at the kids as much as it was, I think, how good is the educational system. You know, there was a lot of, our governor was very critical of a lot of stuff, and he wanted a lot of that testing back then to prove them right or wrong, I guess.
But it was a money grab. I mean, standardized tests have been around for decades. You know, we all did standardized tests of some kind.
California
And
cheaper.
nobody really shook a stick at it because it wasn't attached to anything. The second it came out that in order for the state to get the millions of dollars, actually billions, trillions of dollars, they needed to get out of to get the education funding to be relevant. The assessments were tied to teacher observations, and that's what sent the whole thing into it. So to some degree, yeah, it's they've been around forever. No one ever opted out of things until APPR, that whole time frame when it was how you compare state to state, and it turned into, I don't know if you remember that, but Race to the Top is essentially Hunger
Yes.
Games for money. The federal government had trillions of dollars they were giving away to states, but in order to get access to the money, the federal government, you had to make concessions as a state to get it, and they only awarded it to like 15 states in the country, and New York was one that sold out for, well, we'll do all these standardized assessments, and we'll connect them to the teacher evaluations to prove that teachers are being held accountable for low test scores. And here we sit how many years later, and none of it, I don't know that it made a difference in a positive way.
Right.
Still don't know of any teachers in New York State that have lost their jobs due to APPR officially. I mean, I know that people are told you're not having your, being put up for 10 years, you might want to think about doing something different, but I don't know of anybody that got a 1 on their evaluation 2 years in a row, and actually went to 30-20A and then that's not so, and we're still talking about accountability.
I think the data that we're getting from the STAR that's linked to this same standards is that has more value.
The standards are
Right.
separate from the assessment. I agree.
Right.
That's part of it all.
And they're being assessed monthly.
Believe it or not, Common Core and that whole part of it all was actually very positive thing for education. But it's been given such a negative connotation because they link it all to risk and teacher evaluation that you just.
Parents just started to get really, I think, not happy with teaching our kids to the test. And we've had this conversation about other topics, right? We are learning that there are different pathways to graduation. We are learning that every child learns differently. And to put a standardized test in front of a student and say, isn't that fish analogy, like fish can't climb trees kind of thing? We're asking them all to do the same thing. And I think that beyond that piece that Peter just described, I think that's where parents started to feel like, I don't want my child, not that I think my kid's the smartest, but I don't want my kid to feel stupid and I don't want my kid to feel this much stress. And they're still not getting the education I want them to get. They're still not showing the growth I need them to grow. So how is this helping? So I really think that it was more that, that there were a lot of factors and it was a very difficult decision for other people to make. But I am very interested. I don't know, the 7-8 thing really kind of followed me. So.
And Chris and I talked about that too. We can get that.
Didn't you give that test
We have-
before? Chris?
The opt-out.
Oh, no,
No, the
Oh.
performance fine.
Oh.
I feel like last year it's,
Right?
you gave us
We
a.
didn't want to we didn't
Oh,
want to
yeah.
we didn't want to go too much out. We can pull that. So we can, yeah, so we can see how, like, the kids in each grade level I go.
Yes.
So we'll get there. So that can be done. If you want to do comparison thing that we can talk to see, I don't know if anybody noticed that.
Yeah.
So,
So I just want to make you aware, your first 2 pages are the 2021. How we broke that down, L1, L2 are just the levels, and that's the total number of students. Then you'll have percentages by levels, and then total tested. And then at the very end, you'll see the percentage of students who received a 3 or higher on that test, and a 2 or higher on the test. And it's broken up into 3 parts. The first is all students. Then I broke it into just gen ed students. And at the bottom is supported learning students. Just so you can see the difference in that. And in our ELA scores, math was a little tougher for the kids. There, with the exception of 3 areas, we actually increased both our proficiency rates and the 2 and higher from the 18-19. So the last 2 pages of that will show you what we had 18-19, same data points. And it'll show you how we score, or how many scored 3 or higher, 2 or higher. So for example, if you take a look at 3rd grade all students, this year 43.10% of the students scored a 3 or higher district-wide. In 18-19, only 30% of the students district-wide scored that much. So we had 302 tests, 356 tested before. So there's not a huge difference in the numbers. The 2 areas, just to draw your attention, one, we broke even on gen ed students. They had the exact same in 18-19 for grade 7 ELA. And then our supported learning students, the only areas we did not grow in with ELA was 6th grade, 3 or higher, and then also 8th grade, both 3 or higher, 2 and higher.
Chris, is it historically always this much of a difference between, I mean, it looks like we're getting much stronger in our ELA and still struggling a lot in the math. Is that a
Yeah.
trend?
I would say no, typically the math was a little bit better than the ELA. In the past, I would attribute it, this is just my thoughts, being out with COVID, not in school as much, not having that, a lot of that math, the direct math instruction is what we would have in the classroom and that whole different classroom. I think that contributed a lot this year to seeing it not really increase like we saw the ELA increase. For all your other classes, you're reading online, you're doing some other things. The other thing I think with the
Like I can read something with my child and talk about it at home, but I can't do with calculus. Got you.
The other thing I would venture to say, and I stick my neck out here, is our kids were a little bit more independent during this time than they were in 18-19. If they look at the ELA scores, there's something to be said.
Reading what they want and
Reading things that they want, exploring some topics maybe on their own outside without an adult on top of them all the time. So there may be something to that. I'm not sure. It's just a guess.
I mean, I'm happy to see that progress. I mean, that's a great thing to see. It's just weird to see such a difference between those two.
You know,
children.
the other thing too, we gotta keep in mind is kids just isn't part one. We didn't have the written portion of that. We could still, I think we still would have seen an increase in, maybe not quite as much, but we may have seen even a better increase. We just don't know. Because they want tested on that portion.
So, and it breaks this down. I know we're gonna get to this, but, so I guess one of the parts that I've always struggled with what you just said is, if it's like a true, false, or a multiple choice, the answer is what the answer is. But if an evaluator is reading a student's work, that's kind of subjective.
That's not in this though. They will do that part.
Right, but I'm saying, like, isn't that harder, isn't that one, I mean, it's the same for your AP exams or things like that, right? Like the written part is,
We definitely have criteria that you're bringing kids on.
okay, so it's like a rubric.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and having scored many of these tests, the written parts. You gotta be contiguous, and when you're doing a 5-point scale, it's really easy to be contiguous. And you just said, err on this, if you're not sure, err on the side, the higher side, and that's just common sense, you know? So, but it took a while to bring it in certain people's head.
Well, right, and that's what you wonder, right?
It-
I mean,
It's like
because the
common
same thing
sense.
I've always wondered with math, like, you have some kids who just don't understand the concepts at all. You have some kids who did all of the work right, but the answer was wrong. Or you have some kids who by some stroke of luck got the answer right, but couldn't show their work. So like, I guess, do we get enough information from this to be like, where are you struggling that you scored a 1 or a 2 on math versus, or you scored a 1 or a 2 on math? I don't know. I feel like that's just easier to measure on the literacy side than.
Yeah, math is tough. I mean, like, this, I'm not shocked to see what happened, just because I know from working with the math teachers, it was a struggle during COVID to try and, you know, a lot of their stuff is built in practice, and a lot of them had to do the work on their Chromebooks, and it's really difficult as a kid to try and figure out how to get those formulas and how to type them through their Chromebooks.
Oh, right.
So there was a lot of stuff where they weren't writing all these formulas down, you know, especially the kids that stayed remote for the whole year. So doing that with math was really a struggle because they normally model behavior, they normally practice the, you know, the different equations, and they had a hard time doing that. I know we went to a few classrooms in Stroud, and, you know, they had talked about that specific piece and trying to figure out how the kids could actually type in those formulas. And when it's usually when you're walking around the classrooms, they're practicing those, and the teachers are walking around and seeing what they're doing. They can't see into their phones, you know. So math is just practice, 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 and skill and drill on a lot of the, you know, different types of equations that they show them. So that piece is definitely missing. Definitely missing. So I'm hoping after this year being in that we're going to see some increases there.
Thank you.
So the next data point we have is the percent correct by skill. The state seems to have released almost all of the questions this year, after looking through some of them and kind of making some comparison. Just some key themes as you look through this a little bit. What I did is I really looked at what areas were 50% or less of our kids achieving the point or getting that question right on there. Just kind of looking at some of the themes that emerged district wide, and we'll work on that with our building principals, also specific building specific. What are some things that we can glean from it? And it actually, ELA was not a shock to me at all as to some of the areas, and that was in nonfiction, cause effect, charts, graphs, sequencing, disciplinary literacy skills, especially around social studies and science. The third grade example that they had was about lightning, and there was a chart in there that the kids had to take a look at different patterns of lightning, and then make a determination off of that graph based on some of the reading of what that graph was actually showing. And that's where a couple of our kids got snagged up. So our hope is this year with Savas and Amplify, there's a literacy, a nonfiction literacy component to both of those programs. So that's going to help assist teachers But one thing that we really need to take a look at, we talked about this a little bit, is some of our shared reading experiences. That's where our direct instruction and modeling comes from our teachers of what a good reader actually does when they read. Needs to incorporate a little bit more of the disciplinary literacies that would be in the social studies and science. The other area that we struggled a little bit, not as bad, was in fiction, was on fables and fairy tales of diverse cultures. So again, that's something I know Dana's worked on with the TCs this year to build that into the shared reading experiences.
So in one of these, you would just pull, I'm on page 30. So you would pull, no, this was math.
Look at the first page.
What's, okay, so on the first page, So you would go to-
Right? You would get grade CL at DLA.
right, grade 3. So this R1 3.2 determine the main idea of a test. I guess the numbers are really good, and then we get to just the main idea, and it's 24.8%. So you guys could go back and look at this question number 8
Yeah.
and kind of dissect that question.
If that's a release question.
Okay.
The state only releases 75% of the question. Is it 75? I think it is. Something like that. For you to be able to go back and take a look at.
So we would know like if this is really relevant or if that was, 'cause I hear some of the teachers complain that this is not relevant to what my kids are learning, or the way this is written is not what we're actually using in class. And if that's one of the sticking points on these tests, right?
Yeah, a lot of the reading selections, when you really take a look at it and dissect them, some of them come from highlight. Really where it comes from is wherever they get a copyright for it to be able to include it in the test. So a lot of times you see highlights for children as a reading that might be out of the passage. They might take another passage out of maybe a secondary source of a social studies textbook or Cobblestone magazine. That's usually where they tend to get their readings from, are those types of literary magazines and nonfiction. Cricket magazine might be another one where they would get some from. The issue sometimes is what we're asking children to do. And if you take a look at the thing that everything statewide, we're asking a child to come down and here's a piece of information where you read it and comprehend it. And what we don't do in that process that we're missing is provide background knowledge to the student about it. And we as adults have learned how to do that as a process where a third grader hasn't learned to do that. One example a couple of years ago, 4th grade test. And I asked the Associate Commissioner of Education at the SBI meeting, I said, can you explain to me how a 4th grader is going to, in the inner city, is going to understand the concept of farming, is going to be able to read a science fiction piece, and then apply that idea and concept of farming to another planet at 4th grade, at the 4th grade level. And it was during the headlines. Well, where did that come from? That came from highlights from children. It's very clearly spelled out. That's where you get the permissions from. But you give that to an inner city kid in New York City, and you get an equity issue. Number one, you're not reading too much science fiction at the 4th grade level. That's just not a genre that you're concentrating on. So what you really need to do as you take a look at these tests out as a state is that the best defense that we have is to begin helping to build that background knowledge of students with the nonfiction reads in class, making sure that it's done through shared reading, making sure it's done that you're doing it independently also to build up some of that fluency and comprehension. And same thing, we kind of take a look at, we know that one of the areas that we really need to focus on a little bit more is more diverse texts, because the state loves to ask them. Those are always questions on that state exam. So the best defense we have as educators is really to kind of take a look at what genres are they asking the most of, what do we need to expose our kids to a little bit more, what don't we expose our kids to enough of, and really help to build that fluency and that background for the kids to go on to a cold read on a test. Because I can put a paper right in front of us right now and have you read it, and we're all educated people, we won't have to do what it's talking about. And that's what happens to our kids when they do these cold reads. If you study some of the research on testing, especially around comprehension, there is no good comprehension test test that anyone has ever designed to really adequately pull out the good information to be able to tell where a kid is at. Most of it's done through a kind of reading approach, where someone's listening to you read. That's why the process of knowledge work assessment system is so important for us, because there's different components, those 5 components of literacy, where we can really hone down and where's a kid struggling with that based on how they're reading to us, because we provide that. Sorry, my mask is falling down. Because we provide some of that background information before they actually do the reading piece. And all of us do that naturally. We pick up a book from the library. First thing we do is we turn to the dust cover, right? And if we're reading a dust cover about quantum physics, and we have no idea about quantum physics, it's put back on the shelf because we don't have the schema to bring to that text to be able to understand that without addressing the responders. But man, if it's a mystery book, and I love mysteries. It doesn't matter what that mystery is about. I'm going to be able to connect to that in some way. So a lot of this is kids can't connect to what's in front of them because they don't have that background in school to be able to bring that text.
Well, and then you add the layer of, I mean, in my own house, 3 different kids, 3 different types of learners. So one of them could read it and have a conversation with me, but if you asked him to try to write it down, like he just couldn't do it. It was like, it was so hard to get it onto the paper. So
the way
there's just a
test is,
variety,
it's not
yeah.
the natural way that we read
That
it.
makes so much more sense. So then they will look at these, the state will look at these and be like, okay, like this one, you know, this question number 8, like the whole state blew it. Like, that's the part that we're missing here is they haven't really told us where we fall.
If they're not doing that.
Right.
They
Okay.
usually,
They
they
usually
previously do that, they just send it.
Okay.
Usually that's it's on the public website.
You can see how they're broken
But if
down.
you take a look statewide, they haven't increased the reading test on COVID increase they've done. It's not a significant change percentage wise.
But speaking of that one area, that the supported learning kids did better than in 3rd grade ELA anyways. That's popped out in my head, and I went through the whole thing. So it was one area where supported learning kids actually.
So our best defense is really just to keep our eyes on
Keep
the ball.
what we're doing.
What are they,
Yeah,
what are
right.
they looking at and
Yeah.
making sure that kids have rich literary experiences, not only with the teacher, that the teacher is showing you how to read like a historian, like a scientist, like a reader in fiction pieces, but also making sure the kids have multiple opportunities to improve their fluency and ultimately their comprehension. And that's just increasing the amount of time on reading during the day.
And I think when the teachers look at this, the other, point of value between them and kind of just pointing some things out to each other is there's a lot of value in looking at grade levels and looking at a standard and saying, okay, point of view in 5th grade was missed and point of view is missing in 6th grade. So there's a hole there.
Yeah.
There's a gap there, so I think that it's important for them to kind of look at some of these, like, yeah, you can look at the questions and say this is a bad question, or, what is it that we're missing here? But I think one of the key points too is to be looking at some of those standards and seeing.
The trend,
Right level,
right.
The trend is that it's
From
not
3rd
very,
grade to 4th grade, I'm looking at
yeah,
significant
yeah,
increase of that.
yeah,
So they
so
move
3 to
focus
4,
more on 4th grade, I'm gonna do.
Okay.
So yeah, for the main idea, and then point of view where they shifted, it looks like we're having a little bit of trouble in our academic. There's some value in looking at it like that versus just a standalone exam.
And then next year, time that these where you see 0%, we'll be able to have that information from our BOCES region. So it'll compare us to all the other component districts
Okay.
in here, and it'll tell whether or not we're higher or lower. Sometimes we're higher, sometimes we're lower. And then it also compares us to the RIC, the Regional Information Center. And that includes a whole wide swath of different BOCES of the North Country. And
That doubled from 3rd to 4th grade.
Right.
Okay.
But also some of the standards that I'll skip about them is that they're introducing them at their level and then they're mastering them.
Yeah.
And so Anna, that's how you get parents to engage. You say, hey, we realized that in 3rd grade, like this is something we're looking for. But that goes back to the whole little post that you and I shared this week about you have to get them there first. But that's how, right? Like that's relevant. In 3rd grade, you want them to know the main idea, but they're struggling with that. But look at the progress. And these are the strategies.
First time we're being introduced to it, and then where do we look after we've been introduced to it?
And when you read with your child tonight, how do you talk about it? I live in, it's my perfect education world, let me live in it.
And obviously what Anna was saying is, yes, kids are coming to the table with some of those skills already
Yes.
from their homes, not
Yes.
just what we're doing in school. So that is going to offset some of that.
I think I'm with It's probably in the drive, actually, Chris. You probably dropped the, from 2 years, from 18, 19, I think you put that in the drive, the one where you broke it down by school.
I mean, yeah. Math, fractions, application of fractions are some areas that we really want to work on. Multiplication, division fluency, and also the application of those two. We're using reflex now for some of that. CPC together is moving a little bit faster. We're being able to solve the application division problem. Measurement seems to be a little bit of a struggle with volume, especially. We set word problems as we start getting to higher grades. And then also some pattern too. All right. The next is the regions. Just highlight, obviously we didn't have many kids taking it as we normally do, but just so you're aware, the green just gives you the exam that was given. The gray is the students that are out of district that are taking exam at Madison, either BOCES or not ever from the BOCES. And the yellow is RFA and Stroud, the kids that are taking that here in the district. That's a number we really concentrate on the most, is the yellow. So you've got the performance levels 1 through 5. The only test for regions that have that performance level are the Common Core ELA and the Common Core Algebra. Every other exam that we have here has the 4-point scale as opposed to 5 points. So for example, in living environment, you see no one on that 5-point scale because they don't go up to 5 points, they only go up to 4 points.
Wait. I'm trying to wrap my head. So you're telling me that this year we only had 49 out of 440.
Correct.
Yeah, they didn't,
Yep.
yeah, they didn't have to take it.
They weren't required.
No, I knew they weren't, but I didn't know the option, the opt-in rate was that low.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The only, okay, so the other piece on this data is that a lot of the kids that you do see, especially like in algebra with some of those kids scoring lower, some of those kids may not have been passing the course. So this was their shot to be like, okay, I'm going to take the regions and see if I pass it, because then I get that. And then I only have to get course credit later.
Yeah.
So most of the students opted not to take any of the exams, because if they pass the class, they got the exemption.
It's hardly any really, no.
And the teachers tried to encourage.
Oh, yeah, but
And yeah.
you're fighting with.
So some are like, if you don't have to, why would you?
You can blame them because they're up against.
I-
It's gonna come where they're PPR. I'm not. gonna be honest, I'm not gonna
My
lie.
dialogue with my own child was, if you take it and you don't do well, you can choose to not include it on your transcript. So why not try, as opposed to, yeah, let's let that one slide. But it's,
Too many incentives, that's not.
yeah, it was
That's the bottom line.
a rough year to try to look at that. But now I feel like now we're 2 years of kids not taking these exams, and I'm curious to see what this year looks like when we try to get them to take them. Yeah.
Oh, we're not there yet, so.
A point of pride for us with our regions, again, this shows up is with our ELA exam. Always in the 90th percentile for that exam. That includes every kid taking that exam, because we're required to do that in 11th grade. So that's really a point of pride, which makes you wonder when you look at our 3-8 results, what happens between the 3rd and 8th grade, or 3 through 8, till the time you get to high school. And if you think about it, you've got much more experience, you've taken many more classes, you have a lot more background knowledge to bring to the test.
Something about maturity too.
And mature.
And more ability to choose what you read,
That's
Yeah.
true. Absolutely.
or even choose your classes and what you're reading about, right? You start choosing your electives and that's interesting.
Any other questions on the data?
So thank you for getting this for us. And I think when we get the building, it's, yeah, yeah.
I do have a lot of teachers that I'm just friends with and that work here, and they always talk about this program called Macmillan. And for reading, like a guided reading program, and they always say, and there's actually from a handful of our teachers that are kind of thinking right now, because they're so full. Apparently they want something like this guided reading something. And I don't know what to tell them. I mean, can we go building to building and pick programs according to whatever it is that they think that capacity work for them? And then, so I know we have so many, it probably won't be necessary to purchase it for the whole district unless the teachers. Macmillan is a program the district used to use. And so many of the classes still have all the books and they're using them in their classrooms as an additional resource. So is it something that's on my computer too, like the software tracking? Yes, I think it was just books. It's just, they're samples, readers.
Treasures chest.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was pretty, I was still working, so.
Yeah.
it's-
So you know what it is.
Absolutely.
So is it something that you thought was great? I've
Um,
read it twice.
they want you, they don't want.
Yeah, they want to use it because a lot of teachers, you guys might tell me for this, they don't want Chromebooks anymore right now. They don't want them. They don't like them. They want their Chromebooks to stay home unless the kids are, going out for COVID or something. They want them at home, but, or staying in the classroom one of it. They don't want to teach from the Chromebook anymore. They want live. They said every single time you got a class full of 25, 26, whatever it is, a lot of them will be on YouTube or a lot of them will be on something else. You have to constantly walk behind them. And there's just something like that you have to do. I feel for them. So it's like babysitting a whole, bunch of kids. And then that on top of trying to get them to understand it. So
It's not to actually do online program, should we don't?
yeah, nothing is, they are all live teaching. The only time that they're on the Chromebook is in there when they're leaving the centers. The rotation. I don't have any print, stuff online. Rotation.
Yeah, I think we put that reading program, because it was leveled, and we had a lot of those leveled units and stuff. I know the teachers were very involved in teaching that reading program, and the district spent a lot of money on it. And it was important the teachers got, the Lord is for on. So I know they're talking about they want more. Like,
I don't know, they all the classrooms still have, I know, I
Yeah,
know.
We all, I mean, I don't know if
They're threw them away, they're still.
Yeah.
almost every building now might even be on their second go around of Dollar General funding, and I feel like a lot of level readers were bought with those. Like I remember when Staley got theirs, and we PTG parents went and donated. We bought baskets and we sorted them and labeled them and made clipboards for them. So I do know that like those tangible items were there. I don't know, are some more reluctant to use them because we're still in the COVID thing? Like, are we still trying to?
Not sharing.
The bigger concern I have heard, and I've heard it at all levels and in all disciplines, is the potential that these teachers might no longer have printers and be able to have immediate access to something. And that's
We've
gonna,
been through that for years. The cost of millions of dollars for the district. It's literally positions of printers. We went through that like 3 budget cycles ago. That they're not supported by warranty anymore. And it's not.
I feel like there's still gotta be a way to.
There is. They're just not utilizing it. They don't want to have to print to a central location and go pick up what they.
Yeah, but one central location in a whole building of 20 or 30 classrooms versus,
It's not the right committee for the conversation.
No, but I'm saying
About that, but-
if there are materials they want to use that would supplement, they don't have the access to them for that reason, if it's not already something that we have already.
I would say that they have access, they just don't want to be inconvenienced to do something that's gonna save us money to allow us to do other things that we want to do with that funding in the grand scheme of things. So I would, to your question, Anna, I would say we found a lot that some teachers are struggling with the difference between a curriculum and a resource. And so what is really a resource, some people think is the actual curriculum, like we need to just use this or vice versa. So but if there's folks that have questions, or if they want more of something, if they think they need more, they can just like, if it's a development, I'm all in all, and bring up the principal know, and we can have those. We have yet to not get somebody resources that they said they, or they don't have them.
I think we're trying to get rid of all that, but-
Yeah, which is,
That's been the biggest thing is that we
there's
want.
no reason why the kids shouldn't be.
There is,
using that
and the six schools, they bought a plethora of different
Tons of books.
resources with their SIG funding, especially independent reading books for the kids to be able to have those
Yeah.
in their hands. We do have the guided reading series from Pontus and Bell in every school, so everything's leveled for the teachers to do guided reading with on Pontus and Bell. And the nice thing about Pontus and Bell, and I don't know much about Mellon, I wouldn't throw that order, but each book, when you do guided reading, actually comes with a guide of how to read with that book. So before teachers make a decision about a level C book, they look at the specific skills kids need, and that guide will help them to say, this is a skill work that you're gonna be able to do with this book with kids. They also have Reading A to Z, that is online, but that's another source that they have of level readers. We have a ton of resources for school library services. I mean, for the first 4 years, I was here pounded that teachers like, make sure you use this resource. It's a good resource for reading, it's a good resource for science. And a lot of teachers can take advantage of that service, but we also have that service for electronic. And also they can take out different flag sets, so we don't have to push all those flag sets all the time. I know they've moved on those a little bit. So I think there's a lot of resources that are available to teachers. But again, if there's something that isn't, we'll be happy to take a look at that. But the key we got to have too is our tier 1 resources. We've got to have teachers all on the same page. Otherwise, we're in the same situation that we've been in forever. We don't have consistency amongst our buildings, and we've got to provide it. I know a lot of teachers for tier 2 and even some tier 3 instruction have been using in different situations, which is perfectly fine. That's an added resource. It's just reading, that's what it is. So have added it. Enjoy that, and it works with the kids during this year reading cycle too.
We'll reiterate it with the principals that
Yeah.
if they're walking through the building, they should see a good mixture of paper resources and online resources. That kids shouldn't be sitting in front of someone the whole day. We'll ensure that.
Well, you guys all have kids, when your child is on their Chromebook and you're trying to do something with them. If they don't want to do it, they're going to open up another tab and jump on something else.
Well, aren't we
If they
using-
don't understand it, then they're going to do what they want to do. So it's tough to be, although you can't, there's, you have.
Yeah, there's
But
no
I thought there was a
RTAs,
tool
there's not-
for that, so that they could
School guardian, but it's really more popular with the secondary. They really, they're really savvy with it.
To Anna's point, if you're in the classroom with 4 centers happen, the teacher's working one of those centers. So the other 3 are self-guided really. So if you're using the Chromebook for self-guided for all 3 of them, it does give a kid an opportunity to,
do what they want.
yeah,
It's like a free for all.
we'll bring it up.
Anything else on reading? Okay, civic readiness, I met last week for about 3 hours. This project's a little bigger than we actually thought when we first worked on the pilot. They want us to do an entire plan of how we're going to bring that forward. So we've had some good discussion on this about what that's going to look like. The team right now is interested in all options for the students. There's 2 different columns. One is more the academic piece, and one's kind of the research piece, I call it. Kids have to get up to 6 points on it, and they have to earn at least 2 on each side. And there's multiple options for the students. The Middlestone Capstone project, which is actually, it's worth 1 point. And it's just the middle school version of the high school capstone project, which is worth 4 points. So they decided they really don't want to tackle the middle school capstone at this point, keeping it just right within a high school. because what's happens with this is each kid also has to be paired with a mentor throughout the school. That's part of the process of this. So what we're looking at as a social studies teacher started thinking about this, and taking a look at where kids are at and what they have already for the 6 points. We're possibly looking at 100 to 200 kids that are eligible, could be eligible for the civic readiness seal. The issue for us is how do we manage 200 kids and mentoring at the same time to get through this? Obviously, this year's a pilot year, so I think there's going to be a little bit of leeway as we work with these kids as far as the mentorship. But moving forward, what does that mentorship look like? So that's really where we're stuck at this point is basically you could get almost every kid that takes social studies classes and you can almost work them through this seal at the end of the day. We also want to concentrate just on seniors this year as opposed to opening it up to everybody because we can still catch those juniors next year, still help them through it. The other issue we have right now is they require you to pass the reading exams. Two. I'm sorry, 2.
But is it falling into that thing, the same as the science mastery and the math mastery right now that have that little asterisk of or exempted?
There is a mastery part for that.
Yeah, but I don't think exemptions count for this.
Yeah, that we don't know about its exemptions, whether or not.
Yeah,
it's-
Right, because some of this year's seniors, there's like an exemption caveat.
right, and there's like a
Yep.
new formula for them.
Yes.
And that kind of for mastery, yeah, there's a new formula. With this seal, no, I think you have to physically actually take these exams.
Yeah, some is passing the course. That you actually.
I went and looked on the rubric on the state ed
Yeah.
site. I guess my concern is, I mean, I've seen that some of the districts that were selected, and I think it's like 100 or so, right, across the state. They're already up and running. So I guess I'm wondering if we're,
Our neighbor BTS is not up and running.
so they just have a really good
No
blurb
one-
on their website.
No one is up and running at this point because the state actually just started working with us in October.
Okay, because a few, like, I hadn't really looked at BBS, and I forgot they were the other district because you said was local. I looked at one that was a Western New York, and a big district, one that was like a downstate or Long Island, and one that was like a North Country, and it was a little tiny, like with like 80 graduates, so I think it would be much more easy to do. But like, they were talking about things like what you're, like, it's almost like a pre-screening, and they're like selected. They have to like apply to be in it, where so I guess having a senior, I can speak this, like my son is gonna get science mastery or math mastery without even realizing that that's what he was doing, because he's just been on that track. So, yeah, that's the part I'm confused about with it.
Yeah, so right now, we were able to work through a questionnaire for kids
Okay,
for interest. What we'd like to do, we don't have the plan completely ready because there's a lot of things we gotta think through. And we really want to try to get this going before Christmas break. So that we at least know how many kids we're gonna be working with that are interested in doing this seal. So our first thing, we've got the questionnaire done at this point. So I'm gonna meet with that group again, to figure out when we're ready to release that questionnaire out to kids and see what we get back from our seniors. But right now, we felt it's best to just work with seniors because they're the ones that are gonna be leaving us to get that underway. And then what I'm trying to find out from the state is, can we start this process without having a complete plan in place, or do we have to have a complete plan in place? Because it's a pilot, my guess is we're gonna be able to work at the plan throughout the year to finish it. Because you gotta come up with how you're gonna work with your mentors, which things you're going to allow the kids to do. What's a rubrics for each one of these things? So there's about 10 choices. So we've got to come up with rubrics. We've got to come out with how are the kids presenting that, because a lot of those are projects that kids have to present to the committee.
that's the concern. That
So-
was where my question rooted is, if they gotta do a capstone, like they've gotta invest that
Well,
time.
and again, there comes the 100 or 200 seniors that say, I want this thing. We've got to figure out how we're going to make sure that that happens with those mentors and with the committee to be able to give them some release time to do this. The pay that's involved with this also for these folks. But there's a lot more to this outside of the school day that we've got to kind of investigate and take a look at in this.
And they compared it more to the bilingual than the math or
Model-
science,
that
right?
Model is after the school by
By literacy, sorry. So where they, like, they've got to do a presentation, right? And they've got to write a paper. So,
The SEAL's a little bit different because you have to have specific courses that you have to take along the way that not initially adjusted in your senior year. And yeah, it is in the 2 languages that they have to do it. So it's a little bit more strict for the SEAL by literacy than with the SEAL.
This is much more attainable for students.
well, I would hope it would be, Jackie mentioned it this morning on the equity meeting and just said, civic readiness is something we all need, and it definitely ties into the equity conversation, right? By exposing kids to more things and preparing them to be a good citizen, that should be accessible, not just, but to me, all 4 of these things, all of those accreditations, like I wish I had known as a parent when my child was going into 9th grade. Hey, these are things your child can work towards beyond needing 22 credits to walk that stage, or you know what I mean? So I think these things go hand in hand, that this is an amazing thing, and I'm so excited that this is an opportunity Rome has, but I think it's also an opportunity for us to maybe tweak those other seals that kids can earn, and really, if they know they're working towards something their whole 4 years of high school, or from 7 through 12, and I think that's what this really is, right? This is something that you're hoping you're going to pair them up as soon as they walk into high school and be like, hey, we want you to be college, career, and civically ready to go out into the world. So, yeah, I mean.
Yeah, and the other way that kids can use this also without getting graduation. So that's an opportunity for kids who don't want to get the skill and work this. They can also graduate from high school on that track. That's another track, civic readiness track. So there's some logistics that are involved with that plan that we really got to be able to think through. Because like I said, we could potentially have 100, 200 kids and say, hey, I want to see it. And now we have to find new mentors, and we only have so many social studies teachers. So how do we go about that? So that's a question that we have for the state as we're working through this too.
First, the question here, the application, can you see that how they're using it? Because for the SEAL, you have to apply.
Correct.
If they have to apply.
We were able to work out an application.
Okay, that was the
Yeah.
interesting.
It's for the rubrics and the mentoring. And find out if we can go ahead and start that seal based on that criteria.
Well, I guess I would be interested to know, do the mentors have to be a social studies teacher, or can the mentor be a school board member, a city councilor, a not-for-profit leader? Like, are they really looking for an educator, or can it be someone's who's practicing?
Yeah, it's somebody on the inside, because they gotta make sure that they're running.
Well, I think when the application process starts, just like it would be for the by literacy, then once they voice their intent, then there's a part of the seal where it says you have to have this, your credits for like if we got global, US history, whatever it may be. So there is a piece that guidance has to be involved to say, okay, you applied for it, you have the credentials to be able to move forward for the seal, or this is what you're lacking, so this is what you have to add. So there is that piece there, and then turns out that they do encourage to work with outside people, but not necessarily their sole mentor. If that makes sense.
I mean, that's a twofold. One, it gives you true civic experience, but 2, it alleviates that burden internally for us when there's only so many.
But
people.
a student can earn that civic seal without doing anything on the outside too. By doing different projects, and research papers, and other.
So when will the state give you permission that you can go ahead with this or not?
Well, they have.
Oh, they
They're
have,
highly-
yeah.
Yeah. But
Okay,
the
we're
question,
highly-
the question for me is.
The
do
plan
we need to
thing?
Plan first, or can we get work? through
Okay,
this
okay,
process
I got you.
And then
Okay.
finish up the plan as we
Gotcha.
work through it?
Okay.
Because I really think that working through the process is gonna help us develop a better plan.
Okay.
At this point, since it's a pilot.
Okay.
And what they want to do is basically they want to share those 100 schools' plans with the other schools that didn't do the plan.
Right, well, it'll be what worked and what didn't, right? If every district's doing it a little different.
Correct. Yeah.
So when will you know that? It wasn't at the state, so you can do that.
I've been working with Jonathan for New York, so he's trying.
He's kind of be like the point person.
He is a point person for the state in our
Okay.
area. for Old-West. Yes.
I think it would be disappointing to earn a civic readiness seal without doing anything outside, because as someone who ran a not-for-profit, those organizations are running and thriving based on volunteerism and support. And that's, I think, to me, I thought that was the intent of this, was to get people more engaged, because we've lost that sense of service and community. So just from my perspective of, my past life, I feel like, well, or even here, right? Getting people to volunteer and sit on the school board. I think it's important to think about beyond, so.
Well,
Well,
I
then-
think-
yeah, well, then he's up
Yeah, I've got some more mentors coming your way Thursday night. That rounds out everybody. We need one more science person, but we were able to pair everyone up with a mentor. There's a couple of people who do have 2 mentors, and I believe our social worker actually has 4 mentors that she's been working with, but she's the only.
Oh, 4 mentees under,
4 mentees.
okay.
Mentees, sorry. I said mentors.
Yeah, I love, it's
So,
okay.
so that will be coming your way, and also the after school program will be on the agenda for.
Just a quick question, the Wednesday night, we were supposed to present benchmark data, but the buildings, the teachers aren't done completing the benchmark assessments for the COVID thing. So I told just take it off the agenda. Would you like us to replace it with a 3 assessment data, or skip that as well, seeing that 6 or 9 in Georgia?
No,
I figured with 6 of you here, I was just asking if you want to skip to the 3 assessment data again or not.
Well, okay, so who's
We'll
not
do the
here?
Benchmark data as soon as it's.
One of us will catch Elena up.
So,
Hey, can you give me, do you have an extra packet?
Yeah, right here. 'Cause I get mine from.
Okay, then I'll just bring that packet to Elena and run through that with her. I think she would be interested in it.
Yeah.
Actually, I'll see her tomorrow night. That's not.
Making sure that.
so we just had a few kids from one school that they were quarantined, weren't able to get the map. They wanted to have all their kids tested. So I opened up the window till November 10th. Shuts at November 10th. I'll start pulling the data. And I don't know. I guess I'd like to know what data that you want to take a look at with the start, with some options with that. And happy to do that.
Oh, we'll sit down,
If we can sit down
Yeah.
and take a look at that.
because I remember there's some good reports. If you can get
It's a very
the
good report.
tier 2 stuff, I'll be very happy with that. Then we'll talk about that. Okay.
Can I ask a quick, so at one point in the district, a few things. First, I know that when we got the ESSER funding, one of the biggest things that parents said that they wanted was field trips and more experiences for their kids. And then I know a few years ago, and I don't know at what point, because my kids were beyond the age at that point, that we started correlating kids attending the Nutcracker to their curriculum, and we were only letting a certain rate go. And I have had 2 teachers, 3 parents, and a dance studio instructor all reach out to me about whether or not that's going to be a possibility. I know it's something that we used to do through COSER. And I just wondered what possibility the studio is asking, who they can reach out to. I feel there's something relevant that ties to curriculum for all kids. I think it gives them a good cultural and artistic experience. I think it lets them support their classmates. And I also think these 4 kids haven't been able to do anything in 2 years. And I also know that some kids never get the opportunity to experience the theater. So I don't know, is that still a curriculum type thing? Is that still anything we're able to offer to our kids? I also think that it's really important that these are pillars of our community, the studio and that theater. And I think it's a great way to show some support. So I didn't know if that's still something, but I thought I kind of been getting pounded with it recently. So I promised I would bring it up since it was curriculum related, or at one point had been. Is it still? I guess that's the first question.
It was not curriculum related when I started here at all. It was we spent the entire 3rd grade with the dance studio biggest money making.
No, it's not. But anyway,
Well, that's the way they present to us when we said we can't support sending the kids anymore, because it literally ate up every bit of kosher dollar that was in that kosher for the year, and it was only going towards one grade. The reality right now is we can't transport anybody anywhere during the day, because they have to leave after 11 o'clock and be back by 1:30. So the problem for us is transportation. We just can't. We've got no buses in the day to send anybody anywhere, because the time frame is so short. It has to happen after all the elementary are delivered. And sorry, that's at 11:30. They need to be. They can't get picked up until about 10:30. Will be the earliest we can pick kids up, and we have to have them back on site by 1-ish, so those buses can get to where they got to go to stage for 2 o'clock. So the time frame that we have to be able to do anything really is that middle of the day. That was like a 2.5-hour window.
he did say he understood that transportation has been an issue and that,
That's the number one.
no,
barrier
and he
right
knew
now.
that.
Yeah.
The studio owner
If
knew.
we could transport them all, I would say that it'd still be a financial argument for the funding of sending one grade level. I mean, each grade level gets one field trip a year. So I think most teachers would like to do something different with their trip for the year than that if they could. But we haven't had the conversation, because right now we got a few field trip requests trickling, and I think that it's a matter of if you can meet this window, we'll find a way to make it work for you. But most people, what was the one most recently? There's one who wanted to go to the farm, right?
Rich, yeah.
We were trying to
Tie it
find
to the
some ways to.
Yeah, that's the other thing we've asked, is also trying to tie it. curriculum.
That's always been the case, though.
And-
Well,
So I would question that.
I mean, to make anything fit the curriculum, I mean, that's just. what
At
you
this
do.
point in time, we'd be happy just to send kids anywhere that's not the school and electronic.
Yeah.
Well,
To
and
be
I
honest
guess
with
that
you.
was my point of it. I do know that, he had said if we needed, I understand it would have to be a certain time. If we had to adjust the performance time, we would. It's not that it's a money maker for them, because it's not. It's what they charge for normal tickets. It's giving the kids the extra performance opportunities and engaging them with the arts and the community. They only charge $5 a ticket, and some classes ask their parent for the $5 and it's just the busing. Some teachers have paid for their own class, the $120. Like, it's not a moneymaker for him at all. It's something that's been done forever, but he did say he would look into changing the performance time if that was necessary. And he was also approached by our former bus carrier saying that if a student couldn't do it, they would be willing to, but they don't know what contractual conflicts there are with that. So
Probably don't want to go down there.
I said that too, but I said I would, I said, I don't have the answers. I will bring it to.
I've only had one music teacher actually reach out to ask them about that in our school.
Well, he hasn't sent anything as he normally would. So people normally start asking once they see the packet.
Yeah.
And, and it is just the beginning of November. So this is normally the time that he would start.
Yeah.
But I mean, when my kids were little, we went every year. Every grade went every year because it was a community-based activity and it wasn't overwhelmingly. So I guess to your end, Peter, that we did not set aside any of the ESSER funds for.
We don't have any funds set aside for
Field trips, okay, because that was the number one that came through. I thought it changed. Or in the top 3, I think.
And that's been my answer so far, because I double checked with him the other day, just to make sure the people that reached out for a while.
Yeah, we received that was the first request we had. I didn't know what days and times the shows are.
He hadn't set times yet because he was trying to make a connection here. He's not.
As of right now, I would tell you the busing is problematic. At best.
Right forward.
I did.
So I guess you did, Chris. So we're good. Oh, let me tell you.
Is there a reason those aren't all on our, on the website? All the other, like, finance is up there.
It was on.
It's added now, but when we tried to set our meeting dates, we tried to get them on for the full year so that if someone looked at the district calendar. I'm sorry, what date? I didn't turn it out. Oh, I probably have it.
December 6th.
Yeah, it's, so, yeah. So we set all the dates, but they're not like finance is on here. If I look into the Google Calendar already for every month of the year, but ed programs is not.
That's the project that Sherry did, give that information to Patty to put in the
I'll
calendar.
make sure.
Okay, just because the other night we were trying to, or a couple weeks ago when we were trying to add another policy meeting, I didn't have this binder with me. One bag for ed programs, one bag for policy, one bag for regular board meetings.
And this really, and I have the special ed, which is all students.
Because I thought that was the pink column.
That kid was never lost. He stayed.
I
he stayed
just
after-
didn't-
He stayed after for tutoring, never told mom.
They never.
He told them. He was on a leave.
Parents sent it to me.
probably wouldn't even get it. It's like,
Wait.
you get the standard, you broke down.
So wait.
Separate. No, on this page with the standards. With all the percentages, can you just get all the kids?
No, I got the full packet.